Well, we have got a very special guest. This is someone I've gotten to know over the last several years, Cliff Malloney from Young Americans for Liberty. Look, I just got to do a real quick bragging on these guys, because if you want to talk about an organization that is not only dedicated to great ideas, but is actually doing something meaningful to advance them within the culture, within our educational institutions, within the political environment, Young Americans for Liberty, I think, is the organization to watch. So very excited to have Cliff Malloney on. Cliff, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm great. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be on the show.
No, absolutely. So, hey, give everyone just kind of a brief overview of Young Americans for Liberty, what your organization stands for.
Yeah, absolutely. So Young Americans for Liberty, we work specifically on college campuses throughout America. We've got over 2,500 active members who are out there. We do what we call campus activism. Think of it like street theater. So we're on campus trying to educate students about individual liberty, talking about the Constitution, free speech, right to self-defense, privacy, states' rights. We try to really get students to engage because, you know, the one thing people ask me is, what would be the word to describe college campuses right now? And I actually wouldn't say liberal. I would say emotional. I mean, everyone, you know, when it comes to ideas and kind of talking through the issues of today, everybody's just full of rage and emotion. And so what we try to do is really get students to ask the question, what is the proper role of government? If we can get them to answer or at least have that conversation, you know, we think we can really reach students. And then once we've kind of built these chapters, Nick, what we aim to do is then train our activists. You and I were at an event this past weekend, the Philadelphia YALCON, over 400 students, where we're teaching them how to be effective, how to take this message of capitalism and not just talk about it, but how to go out in the community. And that's kind of the final step of the organization, is something called Operation Win at the Door, where we go out in the community, we identify strong, constitutionally aligned candidates, and we knock doors for them. So that's kind of the full circle of Young Americans for Liberty and what we aim to do.
Well, and I think one of the things, too, that I have appreciated, because you're right, you had your YALCON up in Philadelphia this past week, and incredibly well attended, great speakers, not including myself. Everyone else was great. But what I think has been so promising about Young Americans for Liberty, and the why, you know, one of the reasons why I put such emphasis on what you guys do is because I do think there's a lot of young people that are just leery of, you know, Republican versus Democrat. Right, like you said, it's not enough to just say campuses are liberal. Right, there's different political philosophies that are working their way in there, and I have just seen representatives from Young American Liberty do a great job in finding ways to talk about those values, again, those principles: individual liberty, free markets, private property rights, personal responsibility, live and let live. Right, you know, I was telling somebody once, you know, you don't talk to me about coexistence when you're trying to use the government to force me to do everything you think I should be, instead of letting me make my own decisions. And the YAL students that I have spoken to, that I've engaged with, they really do get that on a philosophical level, and you guys have done a great job of deploying them. So with Win at the Door, this is another thing that I think is unique about Young Americans for Liberty, is there's a lot of organizations out there focusing on the federal race, right? And everybody wants to get on the Senate races and the congressional races and of course the presidential. And I know as an activist before I was ever an elected official, it's tough sometimes to get people to focus locally. Right, it's this whole idea of we're going to change the world by changing the president, and saying, instead of saying, well, wait a second, what about your state representative? So why did you choose to really put an emphasis on state legislatures as opposed to, you know, kind of going after the big offices that everyone's always focused on?
Yeah, it's a great question. So look, in 2017, I kind of was at the helm of Young Americans for Liberty. It was really my first big year. And I wanted to see, where could we have the most impact? You know, we have been creating this youth army when it comes to students on campus that believe in capitalism, they believe in personal responsibility, free markets, the Constitution. But how do we really make an impact? And how do you measure that impact? And so I sat the team down and we analyzed, okay, well, we've got people, so let's look into door knocking. Let's look into kind of activating the grassroots and going out in the community to try to move the needle, to try to motivate voters to take action. And so we had to make a decision, and that decision was, you know, do we do races anywhere from dog catcher to school board, city council? Then you go up, state legislative races, congressional, senatorial, like you said, even president. Do we kind of do a mix of all that, or do we own kind of an area? And we decided we put the numbers on paper and tried to look at where would we have the most impact, not just when it comes to getting folks elected, but our ability to move the needle. And when you look at all the numbers, the state legislative level jumps out at you for three really clear reasons. When you get somebody elected to the state house or to a delegate seat, what you'll find is you've now got somebody who has legitimacy. They've got a platform. They've got a microphone to talk about your ideas. The second thing is you can actually pass liberty legislation. I mean, we preach kind of more of a state approach than a federal approach. We want to limit government. And so now when you elect state elected officials, you can pass things at the state level, and they can become kind of a model for the federal government to take on. And then the third thing is you're really building a bench. You know, sadly, and I say this with no offense to you, as somebody who is a very good example of this, you know, people at the federal level need to have experience at the state level, because when you get elected to the state level, you've got a donor base. You've got voters that are excited about you in the district, giving you name ID. You've got volunteers. So we sat back and we realized if we focus on the state level, it would give us such a great bang for our buck, and it really would be something that would build this bench long term. And I'll share with the listeners, Nick, you know, our goal here, we did a pilot program in 2018 of this Operation Win at the Door. We launched for 76 different candidates, and we knocked over 1 million doors. We won 37 of those races. So don't get me wrong, we won 37, but we learned a lot from our losses. And I will tell you, the ultimate goal here is by the end of 2022, we want to elect 250 of these principled, liberty-type constitutional candidates. And what that will do for us, people say, well, 250, you know, what is that going to do? Why is that your number? Well, that's our tipping point. That's the snowball effect. If we can have 250 advocates, that's 5% of the entire country's legislative seats. If you do that, I really think you have a groundswell at the grassroots, and you'll start to see the country coming back to fiscal sanity, coming back to individual liberty, but doing it across the country rather than, like you said, kind of focusing on these shiny objects, which are presidential or these big races that aren't going to help build long term. That's why we're focused locally at the state level.
Well, and I think that's important too, because at least from the liberty-minded and the conservative perspective, it's, you know, we always talk about the separation of powers. We talk about federalism, and the reason why we don't try to control everything from Washington, D.C. is because it doesn't make a great deal of sense to try to control a population of 330 million people with various cultures and very diverse interests and objectives to think that a bunch of legislators in Washington, D.C. are going to be able to effectively micromanage those people's lives is absolutely ridiculous. But then we don't put in the level of effort that we need to at the state level to ensure that we get good liberty-minded legislation. Because as much as we need changes at the federal level, we also need to make sure that we're ensuring that state legislatures are being staffed with people that understand, like you said, the true function of government. And I know for me, when people ask me, what do you think government should do? I said, I think it should protect your rights. I think it should protect your your property. And then other than that, I think it needs to leave you alone, because I've never seen a government program. I've never seen government bureaucracy do for people what people can do for themselves within their communities, within their churches, within, you know, civic organizations. So let me ask you this. Are there any races that you're looking at in Virginia?
Yeah, I'll tell you this. So the first one, I'll tell you, we're very excited about. We're currently doing a race. We've endorsed Richard Fox. I know he's in a special election, so we've got students on the ground right now. We think he's a great candidate. It's a tight race, but we're hoping to pull him over the top. I'll also tell you, I won't make an announcement about DJ Jordan, but because he doesn't have a primary challenger, but we've been working very closely at analyzing DJ Jordan's race. We think he'd be a great leader in the state, and really just somebody that messages very well, understands the core fundamentals of government, and could take that seat back from the Democrat, which I think is a very winnable seat for a Republican out there, and a very strong Republican in DJ Jordan. And I'd like to formally announce here, Young Americans for Liberty's endorsement committee just put together our final touches on the Tina Freitas race. And so YAL and through Operation Win at the Door, we will be endorsing Tina Freitas. I'm happy to say that. We're pretty pumped for Tina's race. We think she represents everything that we need when it comes to understanding Virginia, when it comes to understanding the state Senate. We really need a fighter, and I don't think we've been getting that with the current incumbent. So honored to be here on the show and to announce that YAL is going to be deploying for Tina and trying to put her over the top. So we're pretty excited about Virginia this cycle. 2019, there are only 4 off-year states: Virginia, New Jersey, Mississippi, and Louisiana. And so those are the 4 states with state legislative races. So we're angling to get as involved as we can to find viable, principled, liberty-type conservatives. And we're excited to be in Virginia.
Well, and I got to tell you, not only do I appreciate the work that you do on the education front and the support front, but I've gotten to a point now, we've got a lot of candidates running this year, either challenging incumbents. We got a lot of good Republicans running to try to take back seats that the Democrats won 2 years ago. And one of the things, the first question I ask them when I get a phone call and they ask me for advice, first question I ask them is, have you filled out your Young Americans for Liberty survey? And the thing I always tell them is, if you fill out that survey, that is going to tell me whether or not you know what you believe, because it's not one of these leading question, check off the box. I mean, when I filled that thing out, I felt like I was filling out a dissertation. Right? It is not your run-of-the-mill milquetoast survey. You really want to know what people believe and where they're coming from. But then the other thing I always tell those candidates, they said, I'm not just telling you to fill out a random survey, right? There's a million little groups out there that will ask you to fill out their survey, and then they won't do anything for you. I said, but if you can convince YAL that you are a legislator that believes in individual liberty, that believes in keeping government within its proper constitutional boundaries, if you can convince them of that through your answers and through your interviews, then they are going to show up en masse, and they're going to knock 20, 30,000 doors in your district. And like you said, when you're talking about these state legislative races, that is an enormous number. And as we all know, door knocking is one of the most effective ways to get out there and engage with constituents. So again, from this state legislator to Young Americans for Liberty, you guys are doing a great job. Your chapters are doing a great job here in Virginia. And I'm going to continue to be an advocate. Real quick, too, could you tell us a little bit about the Hazlitt Policy Center?
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, just to back up what you said about the questionnaire, Nick, I hate to say this, but too often we find Republicans who are not Republicans at all.
Yep.
The Republican platform calls for cutting taxes, not raising taxes. It calls for cutting spending, not adding additional spending. It calls for cutting regulation, not making businesses face even more difficult, regulatory environments. So there's a big reason why we go so in depth, and that is because we want to figure out what these elected officials or these people attempting to be elected, what their true philosophy is. Because we're trying to build this bench, we need to make sure that, hey, if we get them elected to the state legislature and then in 4 years they're running for Congress, we need to know who it is we're supporting and make sure that they have that core principle. So I will continue to say that not all Republicans are conservative.
Oh, yeah.
And we need to move the Republicans to make sure that they are standing firm in cutting government. So Hazlitt Policy Center that you referenced is YAL's effort to hold our elected officials accountable and to provide resources, assistance, model legislation to those folks that we have got elected. So it's our one-stop shop to try to really make sure that our legislators know we have their back, but at the same time to give them the courage to stay principled. So we teach our legislators, how the establishment will try to kind of take you under their wing, how to deal in a corrupt political environment as somebody who's principled. So these are all skills and traits that we are trying to provide resources to them on, and, working through bills across many states that we feel advance liberty. And so it's really cool to see some of these coalitions that come together. I know we've got kind of a licensing reform and some criminal justice reform coalitions that we're putting out in close to, a dozen states all at once. It's pretty cool to see these bills get passed. In Kentucky, we just got through a constitutional carry and campus free speech bill, with one of our members. So it's really awesome. You think we put, 10 students on the ground in each of these races. They find themselves electing somebody, and then through the Hazlitt Policy Center, all of a sudden, now we're passing legislation. That's the real impact, and I think you hit it right on the head when you said it's never just about education. Yes, we do need to keep that principle. Yes, we do need to educate. But then it's about going out in the community and actually impacting elections so we can see this education come to light and see these ideas actually be advanced when it comes to the rule of law we live under. That's what we're trying to focus on.
Well, and again, you guys are doing a great job. And I'll do my plug for the Hazlitt Center too. There's a lot of groups out there that will, quote, hold politicians accountable, and there's groups out there that will provide some resources. But what I found to be so beneficial about participating in Hazlitt Center was the fact that when I get to sit down and I get to talk with liberty-minded legislators all over the country, and we actually get to coordinate our actions so that when I'm dropping a bill in Virginia, a very similar bill is getting dropped in Louisiana, in North Dakota, in Wyoming, and it creates this momentum and it allows us this ability to message with one another, to share tactics and strategies. And this is so important for us because we're not a part of the establishment, main wing of the politics where you got all the lobbyist money coming off because, quite frankly, you're going to, they engage in transactional politics. And so this really provides a network for people that believe in these principles, that want to stay true to them, to be able to work together, find support, coordinate their activity. And again, if you guys weren't doing this, I just don't know of another group out there that provides that kind of network and coordination. I mean, there's some, but there's not many. And you guys are certainly doing it very well. So, Cliff, thank you very much for coming on. Real quick, tell us, how do people learn more about Young Americans for Liberty? How do they learn more about Win at the Door and get involved and support you guys?
Absolutely. Students want to get involved. People want to invest in what we're doing. YALiberty.org, and you can check us out on Twitter and Facebook at YALiberty. Nick, as always, thanks for everything you do. Thanks for having me.
No, it's my pleasure. Again, this is Nick Freitas with Cliff Malloney from Young Americans for Liberty. If you don't support Young Americans for Liberty, you need to reevaluate your life. I'm just going to tell you that, all right? It's just the right thing to do. Look these guys up. Once again, Cliff, have a great day and great speaking with you.
Thanks, Nick.
All right. That was Cliff Malloney from Young Americans for Liberty. We got some advertisements coming up, and then we're going to have candidate DJ Jordan after the break. Stay tuned.